Hey, folks. Welcome to another episode of the California Clays Podcast. I'm your host, Henning Matthew, and on today's episode, I have the pleasure of introducing Anthony Matarese Jr. Anthony is a 26-time NSCA All-American and an 18-time Team USA member that holds the honor of being the first American to win the World Sporting Clays Championship. Inducted into the NSCA Hall of Fame in 2014, Anthony is one of the most renowned shooters in the sporting clays world, with a bevy of regional, national, and world titles under his belt. In 2020, Anthony became the first person to win all four major titles during his shooting career: the U.S. Open, the National Championship, the World Sporting Clays Championship, and the World FITASC Championship. Alongside his father and brother, Anthony owns and operates M&M Hunting and Sporting Clays, one of the only full-service shooting and hunting operations in the United States. Aside from being consistently one of the top clay shooters in the world, he is widely regarded and respected. When the pros or other top competitors want to work on their mental or technical game, they go to Anthony. And when target setters want to learn how to be better at target setting, they go to Anthony. Anthony has written arguably one of the best clay shooting books currently out there called Straight Shooting, and it's available on his website, clayshootinginstruction.com. There you will also find a plethora of clay shooting tutorials and training videos from some of the best shooters to ever point a shotgun. Now, without further ado, here's Anthony Matarese Jr. Anthony Matarese, thank you for joining me on the California Clays podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much. I know you're a very busy guy. You're always doing a lot of events. You're fishing. You're doing a lot of different things. So I really do appreciate this time that you're spending here with me. I know just recently you just wrapped up the North American FITASC World Cup. How did that go?
It went really well. We
Yeah,
had a total of 560 competitors competing. We also hosted the New Jersey State Championship alongside with that, which gave everyone some more options than just the FITASC. So 200 bird FITASC and 200 bird New Jersey State. So it went really well.
that's great. And it sounds like it was Dominic Grassi that came out on top.
He did. Yeah, he had a good score on
Right
some good
on.
challenge targets.
No, that's great. That's great. Dom's a great guy and really like him and his wife Megan. So congrats to Dom on that. You know,
Absolutely.
speaking of the targets, how do you set targets for an event like that? I mean, you've set majors, you've set regionals. Now this is the North American FITASC World Cup. It's got to be different to do that, but how do you get creative in between doing different events like that?
So it's sanctioned by FITAS, so there's a few specific formalities that you have to follow. A simple one would be five pairs on a layout of 25 instead of six. So we specifically made sure that we did that, and we added a sixth trap to most of the layouts, which allows you to to do that a little bit easier and still throw five singles at all three pegs, but not use all five traps because we had six traps on most of them. So that's one thing we did. And then just, finding the piece of your property that has some uniqueness to firm believer in, when you go from peg 1 to 2 to 3, you want the birds to be different and look different. So if you can go from one side of a hedge line or a tree to the other side, you get a totally different perspective. And it just takes time to understand how you change those angles. And, you can't, if you want to do a good job, you have to put some thought into it, and you have to set something up and sometimes, spend a little bit of time tweaking it. So, hard work goes a long way.
Well, I
Experience
mean,
doesn't hurt.
speaking of that, I mean, since you're setting so many events and speed, angle, distance are things to consider, but I'm sure there's a lot more. I'm not a target setter by any stretch, but how do you keep it creative when you've had to do so many of these events? And FITAS is a different discipline, but when you're thinking of your station and what you have to work with, what's your thought process through that?
So you're looking at your landscape, whatever you have that's interesting, right? Some places have more than others that's interesting. We have, woods and trees and field and wide open and smaller areas and bigger areas and some good towers and high towers. And so you're just utilizing all that to your best of your ability. Some venues have great terrain and some have, wide open field and it can be pretty boring. So specifically in FITAS, I'm trying to put you on one side of a hedge line and then on the other side, or put you behind some trees. So then when you walk around, you can, you're on a totally different side of the trap that you were on the first side, et cetera. So, you're trying to be creative. You've got
Yeah.
angle, speed, and distance, but you want the perception of what you're looking at to be different from when you move from one peg to the other. That becomes extremely difficult if you're just say in an open field and
Right.
you don't have any bushes or trees to move the pegs from one side to the other. So just trying to utilize what you have to the best of your abilities.
Well, you and your family obviously have a great reputation in the community of, clay shooting, not only just nationally, but internationally. And you've been doing this for a really long time. Um, do you ever get to the point where you're just like dreading having to do yet another event or yet another tournament and, you know, utilizing the same space over and over again? Like, does that ever get to be a bore for you or?
No, I mean, you if you set out with the right mindset that you're going to do the best job that you can every time that you set out there, then you figure out what you can do different. What you
Yeah.
can do creative. Yeah, there's certain things that at some point in time, it becomes a little bit more limited if you've been in the same place over and over. And then what you got to remember is certain areas that you're setting targets are conducive to doing certain things, right? If the sun is in a certain spot in a certain time of the day in a certain position that your station you're going to be shooting, then the birds at that station could be low, right?
Right.
Repetitively because
Yeah.
your other option would be to look into the sun. So there are certain things that tie your hands, but once you get outside of those, you're just trying to be interesting, creative, and you need good equipment. You need a lot of equipment. You need good equipment, right? So that you can do specialty targets and lots of different speeds of birds, et cetera. So that helps drastically. Towers and et cetera allows you to make it a little bit interesting.
Yeah. Before we jump into kind of your background and everything, can you explain the FITASC World Cup structure?
So I'm not the one that could give you the all the exact details, but I can give you a pretty good overview. So to at the culmination of the World Championship, they award the World Cup. Okay,
Okay.
so when the World FITASC Championship this year will be in Cyprus, and when that's over, they'll at that event they'll do they'll call out people for the World Cup. That means they've participated in it at least the World Championship, the one tournament from their continent, plus another Grand Prix. So you have to participate in three FITASC sanctioned events, a minimum of three with one of them that's in the U.S., the one that we just hosted, the North American FITASC. That would be mandatory if you're from the U.S. You would have to participate in that. Then one Grand Prix that you could pick up, and that could be from anywhere throughout the world.
Okay.
So it's a point system based upon the person with if you're HOA in every event, I believe you get a score of one. So if the person won HOA in the World FITASC and both of the ones they participated in, they'd have a perfect score. So it's a perfect score of one, and that allows them to essentially rank people of how they're doing in FITASC across the world, and those three competitions as a sum is how the World Cup is awarded. There could be a slight deviation in how I'm explaining that, but that's the main gist of it.
Okay. So, but the World Cup is a culmination of the events, and the World FITASC is an event, but it's the World Championship.
Right. If you go to the World FITASC Championship, the prize you're really hoping to come home for is the World FITASC Championship, not necessarily the World Cup would be great, but I don't think that it carries quite the honor of winning the ladies or winning the Open division in the World FITASC Championship itself.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And it's interesting, and it's probably why you don't hear about it as much. Also, is because the main focus is on the World FITASC Championship.
Yeah, there's probably only about 30 people in the whole U.S. that are 30 or 40 people that are actively trying to participate for that World Cup. For example, I don't actively try to participate in it just because it's two more tournaments that I would have to go to, that are outside of a regional or a U.S. Open, et cetera. And I just simply don't have the time to participate.
Sure, sure. Do you find that there's just strictly FITASC shooters out there that like they don't even do sporting clays, like they just chase FITASC?
I mean, in the rest of the world, there's a lot of Europe that doesn't even shoot sporting clays, So if you get outside of England, a lot of your other European countries, that's what they shoot. They don't even really have much sporting clays. They have compact, which is our five stand variation, five stand, and FITASC. So there's a lot in the rest of the world. In the U.S., there's some. The problem is, in the U.S., if you're only doing that, most of the big events to participate in are sporting clays, right? So you're missing some opportunity for competition, and you're missing opportunity for shooting good targets. So I don't think there's any that shoot at the very highest level that are only participating in FITAS from the U.S. There's some guys that love FITAS, and that's what they primarily do. But if I was making a recommendation to any of those people, I would be at least shooting the main events at the big tournaments that I went to, the main sporting events at the big tournaments I went to for practice, because you're missing some really good targets.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, speaking of that, if you had to choose between the two, what is your game?
I mean, I like them both.
Yeah.
I don't think I really, they're different.
Yeah.
I think that FITAS is more challenging from a technical standpoint in terms of being good at a lot of different targets, and you got to read a lot more targets correctly. But I think it's potentially easier mentally. Sporting clays is you're going to have less birds. You're going to shoot the same target, anywhere from 3 to 4 times. Versus in sporting clays, you're only shooting the same target, or in FITAS, you're only shooting the same target twice. So you got to read the bird more often in FITAS, but you only have to hit it twice.
Right.
So mentally, I would say that sporting clays is a little bit tougher from a repetition standpoint.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I love both, and I'm not anything in any of them. But those are what I find that I enjoy about FITASC. It feels more of like a body movement sport, where sporting clays. Not that it isn't. Um, Actually, I don't even know what I'm trying to say here, but there seems to be some feel of like your connection with the bird and the movement of the mount that
Yeah,
feels very,
you have to have to be a good FITAS shooter. I would say you have to have better form than to be a good sporting clay shooter.
right,
Your overall form, your body mechanics have to be better in
right,
FITAS. If someone says, "Man, I really can't figure out FITAS," well, you probably have something wrong with your mount, and you probably have something wrong with some type of form related to your stance and your mount together, and that could be
hmm
the reason. But you get away with that if the gun's already shouldered and pretty close to where it needs to be before you call for the bird.
At the risk of sounding like a total tool here, I'm going to throw out an analogy and get your opinion on it. With sporting clays, would you consider it more of like a brushstroke art with the barrel, where you're just out there, making brushstrokes, if you will? But with FITAS, it's more like a dance with the target because you're of how you have to move in with the target and connect with the bird physically. Sorry, that's
Yeah, I mean,
weird.
what I would say is, they're both equally as challenging and require equal precision, just because of you get more, you get definitely, more off-speed targets and more unique pairs in sporting clays than you do in FITAS. So they're take most of FITAS, they're taking in consideration that you have the gun unmounted, and they're not asking you to have some exact precise movement on being able to kill the first target to be able to get a good second target. So
Right,
yes, but there's also things that to execute at your highest level in sporting, that you have to be pretty precise with what you're doing as well.
right.
It's really about your gun mount. If there's something that can be improved in your gun mount, it's gonna show up in FITAS, and you can get around that in sporting clays.
Right. I've heard, your family has been synonymous with sporting clays, FITASC, clay shooting in the U.S. M&M Hunting Preserve is, you got a great reputation for throwing great tournaments, great events, great target setting. You've been a coach as well as a shooter, and it sounds like you've been a coach since you were very, very young. From folks that I've talked to here in California and just throughout the U.S., have said that they've taken lessons with you even when you were a much younger shooter, and you're coaching folks that are much older than you. Can you take us back to, your early beginnings? I know you've kind of covered this before in other podcasts, but I'd like to get a different take on it. When you first held a shotgun, what do you remember about that moment?
The first time I can remember shooting a shotgun was a 410, shooting at clay targets on the ground, right behind our current clubhouse that, folks who have visited our place have been to many times. Just learning how to hold it and shoot at a clay target, but was stationary on the ground. That's the first time I can actually really remember, holding a gun and shooting at a target. I can remember being in a goose blind and hunting with a 410 and then deer hunting, etc. Um, I don't really remember. We started sporting clays in 1991, so I would have been 7. I don't. I remember going out the first time that we had a guy that took the people that were the trappers, and I was basically about to be one as long as I could pull the trap back. But I can remember going through the course that we had set up, which was 8 manual machines. I can remember going through the first time and a guy teaching us because no one knew how this actually worked and what we were doing. So I can remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, fast forward, I don't really remember. I started shooting at some point, going out there on that course at some point. I remember I had a Browning over and under ultralight 410 or 20 gauge, like a 26-inch barrel, that was a field gun, real light, cut down stock. And then I started shooting more regular when I was 10, and I can remember. I can remember very clearly my first competition.
And this
Where
is an M&M.
the first competition I ever shot? No, it was in a place that's no longer there. It's called Alexander's in Maryland. It was a farm. There's a handful of sporting clay ranges in Maryland that no longer exist, that were popular back then. There was a lot of people going to Maryland goose hunting. There was goose hunting going on, and at that time, to put in a sporting clay range, you needed land and some manual trap machines, and so it was really a minimal investment. So it was something fairly easy for a farmer or a guy that was had a goose lodge or something like that to have some clay targets out there for people to shoot. So that was my first tournament there, was in 1995. So I can remember that clearly. And I pretty much from that point started going to competitions. I never really stopped since then.
So,
Um,
but you said M&M started throwing clays in 1991, right?
yep, 1991 was our first year that we opened.
But you weren't shooting on your own courses
No,
before
I
that?
was. So that's what I said. From the
Okay.
time I was 7 till 10,
Okay. Okay.
I can't really remember exactly what I did and how often I went out, et cetera. But it was obviously, I can remember when I started shooting competition. My brother and I would go out and shoot. Thinking back on it, my parents think back and think that they were probably thought they were irresponsible now thinking back on it. But my brother and I would be out there throwing clays for each other off of manual machines and shooting by ourselves.
Yeah.
But, we also grew up at a gun club. So, my
Was
mom
it
also,
safe to say that you guys were pretty hooked at that point, or were you just doing it because that's what you had to do when you were there?
I wouldn't say that I was hooked until I started, because I don't really remember. I remember shooting, but I don't really remember it that clearly of how often we were going, et cetera. Once I shot in competition, from that point forward, I remember everything very clearly.
Mhm.
So we had shot obviously before that, but I don't remember if we were going out once a week or we were going out. We were young. We were young. My brother started as well. He was only 8 shooting in his first competition. So um, we weren't definitely as into it as we were once we started to enter our first tournament.
Mhm. Were there any early influences or mentors that you had aside from your family?
So when I was 12 years old, I flew to South Carolina. That's where Dan Carlisle lived at the time, and I spent a couple of days with him at his house and got lessons from him. I can remember it.
This before he was in the Olympics, or was
This
post
was
Olympics?
after. It was
Okay.
after. Yeah. So Dan got out of. Dan got out of. I think he shot in the '88 Olympics and then got out of the Army,
Okay.
and he actually moved to California for a while. He was out there. He was kind of at the front of sporting clays getting popular in the United States, and it was just, and you can make money teaching shooting, and there was more and more growth in people shooting sporting clays. So, and he started shooting sporting clays. So, Dan Carlisle, I had lessons with Dan Carlisle. I flew to South Carolina when he lived there, and then he actually moved to a gun club in Pennsylvania when I was about 13 and took a job there. That was not that far away. So I would go shoot with Dan, go take a lesson with Dan about twice a month for 2 years, something like that, 2 to 3 times a month for 2 years. So he was definitely the one who got me, all my.
Was this like an all day thing when you were with him, or
No, an hour and a half, 2 hours,
Okay.
something like that,
Okay.
hour and a half, 2 hours, 2 to 3 times a month, something like that. And so he was a big influence. Uh, I had some guys that I shot with. There was a guy that I squatted with and actually traveled to some tournaments with. Actually, Dan was teaching him at the time. He was from, at the time, he was 50 years old and I was 14 and 15. But I would travel with him to some tournaments, and that allowed my parents to stay home and work, because they were busy and, obviously paying for me to be shooting. So, and my mom and dad went, but that gentleman allowed for them not to go all the time, right?
Hmm.
So his name was Tom Spurl, and he was pretty influential because he enabled me to get to more tournaments than I would have been able to get to if my parents had to take me to every one.
Right.
So
Right.
um, so
What?
those two people, if I never ran across both of them, might not be in the same situation I am today.
Interesting. So, did your parents ever push it onto you because of the business, or was this just like you wanted to do it? They saw your natural ability and talent and wanted you to kind of continue into it, and then they just supported it.
Yeah, not really. I mean, so I'm super driven. I was a straight A. I got one B from the time in school from the time I was in kindergarten until high school. I can't remember my parents ever asking me to do my homework or study for
Oh,
a
really?
test. So, um, I'm kind of, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it well. I played baseball and soccer when I was young, and
Can I ask
soccer.
you about that real quick before
Yeah.
we move on to the rest of the thing? What do you think caused that? Because I'll tell you, I'm definitely not that person. But I did okay in school, and I was good in school also. But I wasn't a straight A student. I'm just curious, like, why did you feel like you had to be one?
I mean, I don't know if I ever, I don't ever feel like I had to be. It's just I always,
That was your standard.
yeah, it was my standard, I guess.
Got it. Okay.
So
That's
I
telling.
played
No, that's good. That's good
I played
information.
soccer all the way through high school. Just in the fall.
Yeah.
I played baseball, and then when I was about 11 years old, I do remember my parents saying, "Look, if you're going to be shooting and going to these tournaments and practicing and stuff, you really, it's too much to be playing baseball and shooting. So I quit playing baseball. I quit playing baseball and just played soccer in the fall because there wasn't as
Mhm.
much many shooting tournaments in the fall. Other than that, that's the only one thing I can really remember my parents, telling me in terms of, that to, give me any direction or telling me, hey, you got to choose what you're doing here.
Yeah.
Uh, but other than that, I don't really ever remember them telling me, you got to do this or you got to practice or um, pretty much just wanted to do it.
Okay. So you obviously were enabled because you also had a gun club,
Yeah,
and
so I had great opportunity, so
right.
um, I don't know. I can't remember how much I shot back then. I
Hmm.
don't think it's as much as some kids shoot today. I know it's not. I know it wasn't. But I would shoot. I know I shot at least a case of shells a week. Minimum.
Right.
I couldn't really tell you if it was 3 cases sometimes or 100 rounds sometimes, but it really wasn't probably till I was like almost college age till I realized like some guys are really, really practicing a lot, and you better practice more if you want to keep up.
Did it come naturally to you? Like, were you a natural shot, or did you have to work at it?
I feel like I still have to work at it. I feel like I teach a lot of people that are a lot more talented than I am. Uh,
Really?
yeah, I don't
Interesting.
think
Okay.
I think for me, it's definitely a learned skill.
But when you started, like think back on when you first started, like did it come naturally to you, the mount, the movement to it? Like you were hitting birds, um, or did it feel like you had to break out down everything and actually build your game from that?
I mean, I can remember I shot a 57 in my first tournament. I had been shooting prior to that.
Mhm.
And I can remember when I first had instruction from Dan Carlisle, basically, you know, I can remember him telling me there's a lot of things I need to do different than what I'm doing now. So I, I wouldn't say that I was doing it correct for the first couple of years on my own because I didn't really have any guidance.
Well, I mean, it was new too, right? So I
Yeah,
mean,
I
not
didn't
a
really
lot of
have
people knew.
Yeah, it's a lot different than now, right? You know,
Yeah,
young kid when he's 10 years old could watch a video and learn a lot of the fundamentals that, I was just out there doing it, right? There wasn't
absolutely. Yeah,
really anyone to there wasn't the education opportunity was way less then than it is now. Way
right,
less.
right, right,
Uh,
right. Yeah,
you couldn't go on YouTube and watch Anthony Matarese shoot, right?
right, right.
Didn't
Yeah.
exist, right? So it's definitely different learning then than now.
Well, so speaking of that, when what did your early training look like compared to how juniors are training today?
I think a lot of it's the same. Dan Carlisle was, you got to do these fundamentals. You got to do it with repetition. I think that a lot of there's a lot of good coaching now. I think there was less good coaching then. We know more now. We know way more now about the sport and what to do than we did back then, right? And the sport was much different. It was less complicated than it is now. There wasn't as many different angles or different curling, looping stuff. There wasn't as much speed change. There was no Rabu. There was no 70 millimeter. There was no,
Mini.
yeah, we had middies, but not everything. There was not chandelles that would throw as fast. There was less speed change. So I mean, I think the training part is the same. I think the best coaches are still kind of doing the same things, repetition, get their correct fundamentals. Hitting a baseball is not that much different today as it was 30 years ago. I can bet the best hitting coaches then and the best hitting coaches now aren't that far off in terms of what they require what they would suggest their student do from a training your brain and your hands and your eyes to work together. And so that part's not really any different. It's just now we know more than we did back then. And yeah, the game is more complex, but the learning curves are maybe shorter than they were because we know more,
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I think the actual training of, shoot this target, I can remember shooting whatever the target would be during my coach when I was getting coached by Dan Carlisle, 50 times in a row, whatever it was, 100 times in a row, So, that's still what I'm going to do with people today, right? So
Mhm.
that part's not that much different.
Is
Just
that because you found value in that repetition, in that grind, in that building mental toughness in those exercises?
yeah, because look, the definition of a skill set is taking something that you believe you is the correct way to do it, and at that moment in time, that's conscious, and you have to repeat that process enough times to where that becomes not only the correct way. You're not only are you doing that correctly, but you're doing it the correct way enough times that it becomes subconscious, and that takes repetition. So, and then if you're successful with executing that in practice, you build not only that skill set and that subconscious, but you build your belief that you're going to hit it when it counts. And that's where the repetition comes in, right? So I'm a firm believer that that's why you can have people that their base approach of what they believe in has lots of differences between what one person is teaching someone and what another person is teaching someone, and you can both get to the you could have three different general styles get to become very successful in both because it's not the style, right? It's the repetition and repeating that and knowing that you're going to be able to do that under when it counts.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
you know,
So
and
you're saying taking the style, not necessarily out of the equation, but using someone's style, but then building the repetition around it so that given their style, they figure out the way to hit the target the best way.
yeah, I mean, look, that's why everybody thinks they're correct. Okay,
Yeah.
everybody thinks that they're correct or that this is the my way is the best way. Because they believe if they do it that way, they can hit the bird. But of course, they
Right.
believe that they can hit the bird because they've done it, 50,000 times that way. So did it 50,000 times the other way, you could probably hit the bird that way too. You know,
Right. Right. No,
so
that makes sense, and that's to your point why so many different coaches have different styles, different things. In a previous podcast with Chad, we were little talking about the literal evolution of coaching and how people have progressed over time, and how a lot of it's just a passing of knowledge, but also a passing of time because of the experience that you need to have to
yep,
develop those coaching skill sets and things, right? How have you seen coaching evolve since you were starting to do it?
I mean, there's a lot more people coaching than there was back then. You still have people that can, you know, consistently maybe yield students with better results. I mean, I think that if there's a disconnect nowadays compared to what there was 20 years ago, yeah, you need to be able to understand how to do a lot of different things, but if there's a disconnect nowadays that people forget that your subconscious gets trained through repetition, and the more things you add, and particularly the beginning phases of someone really establishing their basis of their game, potentially you have more tools, but your ability to utilize them under pressure is less than if your potential is less than if you had less tools. If you have 6 tools in your bag and you're only proficient in using 2 of them, then the other 4 are just going to confuse you and give you doubt. Okay, so I think that if there is anything, since we know so much more and there's information available and people are telling it freely on podcasts and YouTube videos, et cetera. There's more available to us. But if there's any disconnect compared to when I was learning, it was, this is how you're going to do it this way. Okay. And what about this? Don't worry about that. Do it this way. Right.
Mhm.
So there's a little bit less of that, and I still remind myself of that, because I'm a much more versatile shooter than I was even 5 years ago, right? So my game has continually evolved, right? But I have to be careful of how much of that I deliver, uh, depending on the level that the student is at, and when is the right time to introduce them to all of those nuances versus building their basis of what they're doing very sound, where they can score 80, 85% all the time consistently, and then kind of add to that. And then
Right, right.
then bring in that, because the more you add, the more work it takes to master it, and potentially the tougher your mental game is.
Yeah.
So
No, that
there's
makes a lot of
definitely.
sense. It's like, I like to use the martial arts analogy a lot because I feel like there's a lot of similarities and things to compare there. But, when you're starting out in a certain discipline of martial arts, you learn that discipline to mastery, and then you start incorporating the other disciplines to complement your game, if you or your art form, if you will, whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Kung Fu or whatever it is. But that's after you've built a strong foundation with a method that resonates with you or that's available to you, right? So if one
Yep.
coach is giving you one particular method, there's nothing wrong with that. It's that they're helping you build a foundation that you can always rely on. But after that, you're going to need, as you get more advanced, that's when bringing in the nuance and bringing more advanced skills can benefit people, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you working with Dan, um, what was that like? I've heard a lot of different things about working with Dan. A lot of people have worked with Dan that are professionals now. What was his style working with you back then?
He's all about, base fundamentals, have your break point where you see the bird the best, have your hold point. He's a firm believer in being always in control of the target. If I was talking to him today, what I could convince him of is acceptable is different than what he would have said is acceptable when he was teaching me. He's very kind of black and white. This is how you're going to do it. He did a lot of his shooting in the Army marksmanship unit, so he had a lot of training basically, with somebody in the Army
Mhm.
standing over his shoulder. So if you can
Right.
imagine somebody in the Army is standing over your shoulder, it's not a whole lot different than how he is when he's standing over your shoulder, right? He's encouraging you, but he's telling you, all right, this is what I need you to do, So it's kind of constant, a lot of repetition, and just very hardcore about being connected to the bird and seeing the bird. That's the two things. If you can be in control of the target and keep your eye on the target, and those two things to a degree, can work against each other at the same time. The more you're trying to have the gun in control with the bird, the easier it is to take your eye off the bird and try to worry about, you're essentially taking the science of shooting, which is matching the gun speed and the bird speed, and then maintaining your focus on the clay, not the gun. That's
Mhm.
essentially the basis of his approach. So it's pretty intense. There's plenty of stories I've heard of people that were worked with Dan, and he made me shoot too much, and he was hollering at me, and and his response would be, "Well, suck it up and find somebody else to teach you." Okay,
Yeah,
he's not really concerned that you you know he's going out there to make you a better shooter. That's what he thinks. He's kind of a black and white guy. If that's what he thinks you needed to be a better shooter, that's what he's going to have you do. If you don't want to do that, I can remember some lady telling him, my son this, and he's like, let me tell you something. He goes, your son doesn't listen to what I'm telling him. He's not going to be worth a damn. Okay, so obviously the lady, never came back for more instruction, and we never seen his son on the winning anything either, or her
yeah.
son winning anything. So, you know,
There's something to be said to that, though. Discipline is a big part, I think, of any sport or art that you're doing. And I remember my sensei was very, very tough on us as kids. I mean, we were a bunch of knuckleheads, anyways. If he wasn't tough on us, we would have run amok. But looking back on it now as an adult, I see what he was doing, and I see that he was building us into tougher kids,
yep,
mentally. We wouldn't get easily phased by someone who was giving us crap.
yep,
And because of, Jim was giving us crap and we could take his crap, when we go out in the real world, we're able to handle a lot more than most people are able to. And
yep.
so I wonder if,
Yeah,
Dan,
he's an incredible coach. He's an
yeah,
incredible motivator. He teaches you to believe in yourself, and that's a big part of coaching someone. And he's going to be very, he was very, this is what you need to do, and very strict with trying to get you to do that. But on the flip side, when you got done, he had you believe that you could hit anything out there.
yeah.
So it's that's definitely part of good coaching.
When you were with him, was there a period of time in your training that you plateaued or you struggled with the skill set or something that you struggled with it, but then you had to break through and you finally something clicked?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you can have. I actually just wrote an article about plateaus. We're still in the editing phase of it right now, but I feel like a plateau. You're gonna have. They're natural, and you're gonna have tons of them.
Mhm.
I don't know how many plateaus I've been on. But I feel like a plateau generally is longer than the hike up. So there's a good quote that I just shared on Instagram the other day. It says it's not that most people fail; they just run out of patience.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point.
So I believe that. So essentially, a plateau is a moment where your technical skills and your mental ability and beliefs don't necessarily align to allow you to take that next step. That's all that I really believe that it is. So, um, you know, a lot of people get in that low 80 range, and there's so many factors that can keep you in that low 80 range. That it's not one factor, right? So it could be something's off on your technique, something's off on reading the birds. You have a great round, but you bomb two stations, right? So if you have a great round, you bomb two stations, hard to shoot 90, right? You misjudge a couple targets. You don't bomb any stations, but your mental game's not clicking, and you miss one bird on 10 stands, right? Then have one bad station. So there's a number of reasons that can cause you to kind of be at that plateau. But, ultimately, I feel like whatever the level is and the level that you're trying to get to, um, when you're at that kind of moment where you feel like you're stuck, it's some combination of your technical game and your mental game not being together enough to go to the next step. And I feel like they kind of both have to be there to kind of take that next step. But I think it's perfectly natural, and I think it's also the moment where people change too much. They change too many things. I don't know. I mean, I've been coaching a long time, so I've had students that have worked with me and went and worked with someone else, and come back more than once. Okay, so
Trying to
some
chase something.
yeah, they're looking. They're looking for something that doesn't exist. Okay,
Right.
And
Or it
sometimes,
exists within themselves, but they haven't figured it out yet.
yeah, so they, sometimes they've come back to me and all right, this is what I'm going to get you to do, but it's not that much, maybe I take a little bit of what you learned wherever else you went, and I have zero ego,
Yeah.
related to that. I don't care, right?
Yeah.
If my best student called me up tomorrow and said, would you be upset if I went and took a lesson from someone else? No, go right ahead. Okay. It would be dumb if I was upset because, if you think you can learn some, I hope you do, and
Right. Right.
if you need help, call me back up. I'll help you out.
Right. I think
I
that's a
have
very
no,
good approach, by the way, and I admire
yeah.
that response
And,
because
there's multiple people that have come back to me, and sometimes we add a little bit of what they learned to what their game is, but sometimes we just go back to what we were working on. And, I think that it goes back to that training of your subconscious to truly be able to handle the situation when it counts and when the pressure's there. And if you have too many different things, it's harder to, to do the one that works when you need it the most, right?
oh, you mean too many different techniques or too many different
Yeah, just too much.
considering?
If the person's at that plateau, then they're searching for something that's going to get them to the next level. Then maybe that technique works really well, but it doesn't transpire into consistent results or something, right?
Right, 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 right. I got you.
And then they go down that road for a little bit, and they could be at the same level they were or worse. But the problem with then is you know, there's an analogy that I read, and it might have been the book, The Talent Code. That's a pretty good book related to training by Daniel Coyne.
Hmm.
It might have been in that book. It might have been somewhere else. And he explains, like, every time you do a repetition the correct way that you believe is correct, whatever the discipline is, it's like putting in a raffle ticket. Okay. And if you have a basket full of raffle tickets, when you do it correctly, and correctly doesn't mean you hit the target, doesn't mean that you got a hit. It means that your form was correct. Okay. To you intended to execute. It's like putting in your ticket. Okay. Um, and when you get to a tournament and you're under pressure, it's like taking that basket and shaking it all up. Okay. So the more times that you put in the correct ticket, the higher the probability is that you can draw 6 of the correct tickets, automatically from your subconscious without thinking about it. So that's where those reps are important. And that's where then someone that's in a plateau that starts searching for an answer can deviate away from what they believe in. Now, by all means, deviate away from what you're doing if you truly believe that it's incorrect or you truly
Right,
believe that you can do something better.
right, right.
But
But
um,
how do you know? That's a good point. So how do you know when you're doing it right and you need to shake it up, or how do you know that look, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing,
this
but some
isn't
other,
working. Right. That's
yeah,
a good question. I mean, I think that, it comes back to, the first question you have to kind of go to is, okay, where are you now? What are you trying to achieve? And what are you doing to get there? Right. So are you doing what's required at the moment, depending upon how ambitious your goal is? Um, and, if we answer that, if the person says, I'm trying to win my, state championship, and I've just made it in the master class and I've been, stuck there for a year and a half and I'm doing it the way that you told me to do it. And geez, I'm not getting there. And I said, well, how much are you practicing? And you go, well, I'm getting out and doing a case of shells a week. That's not bad, but you're probably not going to beat some other guy at your state championship that has good technique as well and shooting 2 cases or 3 cases a week, right? So sometimes that's the facts of life, but it's very important before you make decisions about what you think you need to change or do. So that's always in it. I had a gentleman one time. He said, "I'd really like to shoot at the level of this guy," you know, and I know a little bit about his background. I'm like, "How much are you shooting?" The guy that he wants to shoot at the level of has got 10 more years experience. The guy that he wants to shoot at the level of shoots once or twice a week plus tournaments on the weekend. He goes, and I was seeing this guy about every 6 weeks for a lesson at the time, and he was doing quite well, in my opinion, right about where he should be. And he said, I get out and shoot, maybe once every other weekend, or if I have a tournament, then I don't practice. I'm like, well, the level that you're trying to compare yourself to, um, you're not going to
You're
get
not
there.
putting in the work.
You're
Yeah.
not going to get there at the rate of what you're doing. You're going to be dead first. So, and the guy said, really? And he was like taken back by it, and he quit. Okay.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Because he didn't want
I'm
to
not,
invest any more
I,
time into
I
getting there.
could have lied. Well, it wasn't even practical for him. He lived in the city. It was 2 hours to get to the range. So I could have lied to him. I guess he'd still be out shooting and still be disappointed. Right. But, I'm not going to lie to him, so, that's, so
I
I
feel
think,
like,
I think that's a real question. Right.
yeah.
Um,
I feel
and
like all roads eventually lead to experience and putting in the time. There's no shortcuts. I mean, you might be able to shorten your learning curve, but it
yeah,
still sounds
good,
like a lot
good
of this is
instruction. Good instruction shortens your learning curve. Okay. Good instruction helps someone teach you how to be a better competitor. They teach you all the mistakes that they've made. They teach you when to do what, but it gets I can take a talented guy that's going to a tournament every other weekend and get him the master class in a year and a half if he's, doing that. But
dedicated.
that
Yeah.
doesn't mean he's going to win when he gets there. Right.
Right, right.
So, uh, yes, I mean it depends the level that you're looking at, right? But
Mhm.
I think in any discipline, you know, the highest level in any discipline has a level of what the person sacrificed to get there. That's outside of what most people either can do or willing to do. I have sacrificed myself. I sacrifice a lot my whole life. And there's still things that I could be better than I am right now. But there's a lot of things I don't want to sacrifice to be any better than I am. Right. I'm going to
Right.
still grind as hard as I can, given what I'm willing to give up. There's a regional. The first regional of the year is the Northeast Regional. It's on Father's Day. I've been fishing on Father's Day with my dad for the last 20 years. I'm not going. Okay. So why? I don't want to, right? I'm not willing to miss that, right? So, you know, that would be a decision I have to make, right? So there's tons of those. I got
Right.
4 kids. They're playing sports. So uh, I get done work. I got to go practice for 20 minutes because that's how much time I have if I want to still be able to get to the softball game. Right?
Right.
It'd be a
Right.
lot better if I could practice for an hour. Right? But that's a decision I got to make.
Mhm.
Right?
My brother has 4 kids as well, and I know you have 4 kids, and I know how tough that can be.
Oh, I mean, I feel like I'm in, my kids are from 2 to 11, I feel like I'm in boot camp, you
Yeah,
know.
same with my brother as well. They're the same age group, and he calls me sometimes with, just like I'm his therapist essentially in a good way,
Yeah, I mean, it's the
his brother,
best
of
thing
course.
ever. It's awesome,
Yeah.
but it's a massive commitment. And I try to take the same level of intensity of, being a good dad as I do anything else that I do.
No, and
Uh,
I could tell. I mean, just based on interactions, that I've had with you, and then just what I've seen with your families at tournaments, and then just, also what you post about in social media. And my brother, he's a great father as well, but it's got to take a toll a little bit, right? Does that affect your competitive ability, or do you
I'd like to
compartmentalize?
say I would like to say no, but it's a massive, commitment.
Sure.
Is it realistic to say, oh no, it has no bearing? Yeah, it's unrealistic to say that. We got 4 kids to get ready to go to school in the morning before I go to work. You get done work, 4 kids at that age, you got 3 to 4 hours in the evening between studying and sports and whatever. I've got 6 hours less in my day
Yeah.
to do uh, other things that I need to do than I would if I didn't have 4 kids, right?
Right.
So yeah, I would have more time to practice. I would have less stress, right? So I still got to go to work, right? I still got to,
Right.
do all that. So, it's the best thing in the world. I love them, but it's definitely a challenge, to balance everything that I try to do.
Can you give some advice for folks who are balancing and uh, taking on a lot of different things, but maybe not just kids, but work, but family health issues, whatever it is. Like,
Yeah, I
what
mean, I
do you
think
feel
you
that?
have to be super, this is where, when people, there are a lot of people that say, man, I, you know, I have people stop me, and say, man, I can't believe, how well you shoot with all of those commitments or whatever that you still have. You have to be super driven and you have to be very scheduled. I mean, I already have in my calendar, you know, whatever, I could pull up a date. Oh, October 13th, practice, 4:30, right? You have to be very structured and figure out and use every. I mean, I use every moment of my day, from the time I wake up until the time I go to bed. So, and that's the only way I can fit it all in, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So.
When do you wake
I,
up? Are you an early guy? Are you a later
yeah, I
guy?
generally get up at 5. And
Okay.
I have to actually, as I go to go into a tournament, I got to try to get myself on a little bit better sleep schedule, because I'm easily, up at 5 and go to bed at midnight, and that's not
Right.
enough sleep.
Yeah.
It's not enough sleep to shoot at my highest level. It's harder to shoot at 40 years old than it was when I was 25. Okay, for sure. Uh, I don't feel like I'm any slower or my eyes are any worse, but I need to sleep more.
Yeah.
There's no question, about that. So um, kind of answering your question, I'll get done work sometimes if I'm trying to get in opportunity to practice and call my wife on the landline phone because I don't even want to turn my phone on because I don't turn it on all day long when I'm teaching shooting. I call her on the landline because I need 30 minutes undistracted to go practice, right? And if I turn my phone on, I'm going to be distracted right away, so it's just you have to have a goal. You have to work towards that. And your goal doesn't have to be, I think a mistake people make is, they're if your goal has to be practical, right? So if your goal is practical and you can achieve that, then you're successful.
Mhm.
Okay. At the moment in time, successful might not be defined as for that person what their total potential was if they didn't have other obstacles in life,
And
So
success may not always be winning either, right? It may
yeah, it
just be
has
that
to.
they accomplished.
It has to. Yeah, it has to be reaching what a level that is better than you would have been if you didn't set a goal to reach towards it. So that's something that I do. And I think that helps me. One, I think it actually helps me with pressure, and two, um, it helps me basically be okay with the result that I get. Uh,
So,
you
so
know,
tell me about that. So, when you're saying dealing with pressure, are you setting yourself goals that as long as you achieve that, regardless of the outcome, you're okay with it?
Yeah, I mean, your mindset is huge, and then if you take in a situation where someone is busy or doesn't always get the opportunity to do exactly what they intended to do or would have done if life was a little bit different, it's even worse, right? So, my goal is, if I can get my mindset correct, my goal is to do my best effort, whatever that enables at that moment. Okay. Um, you know, my best effort might not be getting out to practice, 3 times a week because I don't have time to practice 3 times a week. My best effort is getting out there and doing whatever I'm able to. And then I put in all the effort that I could and I show up at the tournament and I get to the station and I read the birds and plan the station, rehearse the station and follow my routine and try to hit every clay, then
Mhm.
that's what I got. Right.
Yeah.
So if I can, if that's winning or coming in fifth, then that's what I have. Right. And the, you know, you can, look at that however you want, but the more that you can
Well, let me
believe
let
it.
me if you don't mind, let me just ask you a question about that. I feel like I don't know you that well. I've met you a few times. We've talked a few times, but what I gather from talking to you is you're someone who doesn't make excuses.
No, there's no
And-
excuses. Right.
right.
So for
And
me, and I think
but
that,
you also don't beat yourself up either. Like you might feel disappointed in you not giving your 100%, but it feels like you don't beat yourself up. You accept it and then you learn from it. Is that a fair assessment?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you have to, you're going to be, if you do this sport long enough, it's a very challenging discipline, and if you're beating yourself up, you're going to be beat up forever. Okay, so you have to learn from it, move on, and if you can truly believe that you judge yourself based on your best effort, then that's your best effort, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So and I try to live by that, right? I hate losing, right? That's why I'm still doing this, right? But you know, I can only do it, I can tell you that there's never a time out there that I could have hit any more than I did.
Yeah.
So if I hit everyone that I could have, then ultimately that's what I got, right? So
So
um,
what did you learn from that pressure that, to help manage your nerves for those competitions is that as long as you're putting your best effort out there, you've done
yeah, I mean,
everything you can.
if I could have understood my mindset, I had moments in my shooting over the years, probably the worst would have been like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. If I wasn't shooting well and was at a tournament, I just wanted it to be over, right? Like, if I wasn't shooting at my top potential, was not having any fun.
Hmm.
Okay. But that was because I was prioritizing just winning, you know, and I still shot well in that time frame, and I had good results, but I didn't have nearly as much fun. So, at times I hated it. Okay. What I learned over time is, you can control what you do, but you can't always control what the outcome is. So worry about what you can control, and the result's going to be what the result's going to be. And you're either going to win or you're going to lose.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the same in any sport, right? The
And in,
best
in business and everything else that
yeah,
you
the
do,
best
right?
players win and lose, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to control what you can, and if you can believe that. See, the difference is people, when I sit here and tell you that, I believe that, right?
Right.
So if I can believe that, then I can actually handle the pressure better too. Okay,
Right.
so if I believe that I'm going to go out there and hit every bird that I can, and we'll see how I do, you know, doesn't mean I'm not trying 110% on every shot. I am. Um, but I believe that if I try 110% on every shot, I've got as good a chance as winning as anybody else. So we'll see how it shakes out, right?
Right.
So that helps you handle the pressure a little bit. It helps you enjoy it more than being so upset if things don't go the way
Mhm.
that you want them to.
What was your first big win? And I'm not talking like a local thing, like your first big one that made you go, maybe you saw yourself differently afterwards.
There was a there was a tournament that they used to have, well before regionals, and zone shoots happened before regionals, and they weren't never really that big. So you had, your at that time, Seminole Cup was a big tournament. The Browning Briley in Texas was in Texas at the time, was a big tournament. And then there was a tournament in Maryland at Hopkins. They used to have a big tournament there called the Big Pig, which was in the same time frame. Like Hopkins had like their first U.S. Open there. But as soon as that tournament ended, the following year they had the guy that was hosting it was like the sponsor of the tournament. The tournament left there, or they didn't host it anymore, and they had a tournament there called the Great American. And they still have that tournament, but it doesn't have any of the significance that it had then. Most of the best shooters in the country were there at the time, and I believe it was 1999. So I was like 14, about to turn 15, and or 15, yeah, 14, about to turn 15, and I won that tournament. And the guys that were winning at a national level, almost all of them were there. So that was kind of like, wow, I beat all those guys, right?
And you're
Um,
14.
yeah, maybe just about to turn 15.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Um, so that was
How did that
kind
make
of
you
like,
feel when you did that? Was it a boost of confidence? Was it I feel like I've arrived and everything that I've been working towards is paying off? Like, what did it feel like for you?
yeah, I mean, I feel like I could hit the birds before, just finally did it, when it counted, right?
Mhm.
So,
Did you feel pressure on that tournament or did you just feel smooth?
No, I was, I still feel pressure today, so
Sure.
yeah, I felt pressure. I mean, and it didn't mean that I instantly won everything after that. It was still a challenge. Still is a challenge, right? But definitely was. I can remember it, right? Yeah, so I can,
Was there like a competition or a phase in your training that shaped your mental toughness the most, like going through it? Some people say the PSCA was like a really pivotal part for them because they'd never seen targets like that before, and that made them even better after the PSCA. Was there something like that for you?
Man. I mean, to be honest with you, I think the honest answer is that it's been just kind of a constant, gradually get better.
Yeah,
You know, gradually get better as I go and understand more about what works for me.
right.
And I wouldn't say that there's a moment that I can remember that like this changed things.
It's still an ongoing thing and a thing that you're working on constantly.
Yeah, I
But You're
mean,
you're pretty humble considering your accolades and everything you've done. You're very humble about your skill set still. And do you feel like that's because you feel like you've had to work on it and you continue to work on it, or it doesn't come easy and you have to?
to be honest with you, I don't think it comes easy because I couldn't imagine anyone doing any more work over a period of time than I have. So I don't really think it comes that easy to me, right? I still practice. I don't practice maybe all the time as much as I'd like to, et cetera. But I didn't shoot for a couple weeks after the U.S. Open, just busy, and we had the tournament at our place. And then I went out on. Uh, I was off on Memorial Day on that Monday. Actually, did one lesson first thing in the morning, and then we were going to go with our family out to the lake and go fishing and stuff. And I went and practiced from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock and shot 500 rounds. Right, just working on the thing I need to be working on to be ready for the World Championship in July.
Mhm.
And
What is Anthony Matarese working on now? Like what do you what at the level that you're at? I mean, like is it? I mean, could it be mental? I mean, is it like technique? What do you find yourself
mostly
coming back to a lot?
Yeah, it's mostly making a decision to do a certain thing in a certain situation, right? Like,
Right.
if I have this bird and FITASC, how am I going to approach it, and knowing that the way that I'm going to approach it is going to work. So I started off that day. I haven't really done any dedicated FITASC practice this year, where I've actually went out and shot a
Mhm.
case of shells just with a FITASC mount, and
Okay.
I shot all 500 shots that day, from a FITASC mount. And I'm going to shoot the majority of my shooting between now and going to the World Sporting and then the World FITASC. I'm going to shoot the Georgia State Championship a couple weeks before that as a good tournament right before. I shot the first 100 shots that I shot, just a basic trap within 10 yards of me, just a medium speed going away, just making sure that, I can be 100% confident that I can mount the gun and know that I'm going to hit the bird. I think your
Okay.
most basic trap and quartering in FITAS when the pressure is on is not that easy. Especially we would shoot so many of them with a mounted gun.
Right.
So just fundamentals of that's basically allowing me to practice my gun mount, allowing me to practice watching the clay. On an average day of practice, I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to build confidence and train myself to keep my eye on the clay. Those two things. That's it. Right. And they go along with each other. Right. When you build confidence, it's easier to keep your eye on the clay.
Right.
So, when I say I'm training myself to do that, I'm trying to see what part of the bird that I want to look at when I pull the trigger. Right. And to be able to apply the correct technique that I want to do on that bird, the correct approach, and maintain focus on the bird. Those two together are not that easy.
Hmm.
So that's generally, what I would be working on or what I would be practicing.
Okay. And when you say keeping your eye on the bird, I mean, I know there's variations of that, right? With
Yeah, I mean, it's
percentages of barrel awareness and all that type of stuff. But for you, what would you define that as? Is it to ensure that you're not actually truly barrel checking?
yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily I used to, I don't really feel like currently that I actually like remember really like checking the gun a lot at the end of the shot. I can remember parts of my shooting really not that long ago, 5, 10 years ago, where, I could get nervous and on the last pair, check the gun, check
Yep.
the lead. To me, most of my visual, most of my vision that I'm trying to train is actually watching the bird all the way through pulling the trigger, right? So I feel like most visual misses by more experienced people that really understand watching the clay are not so much just looking at the gun or looking at the lead or measuring. That's definitely happens, and it's definitely very common for, the, uh, you know, less experience. But when I say less experience, I'm really referring to less experience than me. So that's a lot, most people. At my level, if someone understands really watching the bird, they just don't finish the shot visually, right? They remember, the problem is you're going to remember seeing the bird well, okay, because you remember what happened up until the last moment, okay, but you won't remember, when your eyes coming off the bird a little bit, um, you won't remember that, you'll be surprised it didn't break, type of a thing, and the only you can deduct that happened because if you felt like everything else was correct, then it's some feel part, the best analogy would be it'd be like any sport making a shot that's close. It's like your golf cut being 2 inches short, right? It's a feel. Just being just being off a hair on the feel part of the discipline. The feel part in shooting, the end part of the field, meaning the end part of the shot, the feel part at whatever level anyone's at, has to come partly from your eyes. And I stopped. Here would be a simple example, and I'll speak exactly how I said to him. So the first day at the U.S. Open, Zach shot really well. Zach Keembaum shot really well. Zach and I are good friends. We've known each other for a long time, and he shot really well the first day. Zach's never won the U.S. Open. Obviously, there's some pressure related to that. Second day, the course was much easier than the first day, and I didn't shoot well the first day. I actually started the first day kind of nervous and just couldn't really shake it. Kind of fought my way through the whole round and shot a below average score. And second day, I shot pretty good. I didn't shoot to my potential, but I shot okay. I missed 5 out of 68, which was some guys missed 3 or 4, I mean, most people missed, 5 to 8 or 9, at the top 10, 15 guys in the sport. And
I was going to say, because I know a lot a missed a lot more than that.
right,
Talking just about the top.
right, yeah, yeah, the top 15. If you're looking at the top 15 guys, it ranged from down 3 to
Yeah.
down 10, right? And I saw Zach when I was leaving the course, and I was, I'm rooting for him to win. He was 6 shots ahead of me after the first day, and I stopped and I was like, how did you do? He's like, terrible. Okay. And I was like, what the F, I won't refrain from saying the word, what are you doing? Okay. Like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah.
Like, I missed 5 and I wasn't particularly happy about it. And he missed 12. Okay. He's like, I don't know, man. He goes, I'm not looking at the bird, I guess, So, what does that mean, right? What does that mean? Well, he's one of the best guys to ever shoot sporting clays, right? And he says, I'm not looking at the bird, I guess. So he's looking at the bird. He's really looking at the bird by most people's definition, but not for that. You get a little bit of mental stress and, it's a mental failure. Yeah. But your mental failure ends up in a visual failure.
Right.
That's what
Or
happens.
not completing the picture, right? I was just at the gun club today and I noticed and Zach has talked to me about the visual discipline game quite a bit. And I've picked up so much from him, so much from your book and others where I feel like just starting to scratch the surface of understanding it, but it's how you use your eyes when you're looking and
Yeah,
finishing off the move. And that, to your point about the feel part comes from your eyes, right?
yeah,
You know, I had a chandelle that I was shooting at a five stand and I was breaking it every time. But on one round, I missed it. And it's because I was so confident that I knew the trajectory. Instead of looking at the bird, I just made a move and
yeah.
I
You shot where
overlet it.
yeah,
Yeah.
shot where
And
you expected it to be, right? You know.
exactly. And I just didn't finish looking at it. And so
Yep.
that connection to the bird is so important. So when you say that a lot of what your training and focus is on how you're using your eyes, you know, I think not, I don't even think it's an advanced thing. I think it's as you do get it more advanced, that is the
Yeah,
game,
it's
right?
it's it's directly related to your mental game, you know. So,
Yeah.
you know, when I say it's directly related to your mental game, when your mental game is working really well and you're confident and you have this kind of everything going in the right direction, watching the bird is much easier. You know, so that's why most people don't understand watching the bird. And it's
Mhm.
because they have a lack of perception between what's happening when they're doing well and what's happening when they're not doing well. You know, I have been down that road 1,000 times. You know, that's why I'm training myself to look at the clay
Mhm.
so that when I'm on my last 25 to shoot at the World Championship and I'm nervous as shit, you know, I know that if I can keep my eye on the bird, I can still hit it
Right,
no
right.
matter how bad my mental game is at that moment or how good it is, right? Doesn't matter, you know. So that's, you know, and that conversation is hard to comprehend for you know,
Well, it
for
took
a
me a
lot of
long time to understand what Zach was saying, you know, and Desi was
yeah.
saying when I was working with them. And I mean, literally years, right? And then one day it just finally clicked about what that meant and it made sense to me. So I think everyone
And
figures
the
it out in their
mechanics
own.
have to be, you know, the mechanics of what you're doing and your technique have to be solid enough that you can even get to that point where
Right,
the gun is in a good enough position that you can watch the bird and ignore the gun at the end of the
right,
shot. Okay. Still see it and have an idea where it is, but if the form is off or the mechanics are off and your gun's not in the right position or you haven't seen that type of bird before and you're nowhere near far enough in front of it, then the feel part doesn't matter. The feel is how it comes off the tip of your fingers to go and make the basket and get it, you know, nothing but net.
yep.
If something else is drastically off and you miss the whole backboard, doesn't matter how it comes off the tip of your fingers. Okay, you know, so
That's actually a really good analogy. Yeah, I've
you've
seen
got
that.
to you've got to be at that point where you're you know where you've got the mechanics of down and the read of the bird down enough for to you really start to understand seeing the clay. So seeing the clay has a multitude of layers. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
you learn it and you relearn it freaking 100 times. Okay, you know,
Why do you think that's such an elusive thing to keep?
because it's directly correlated to your confidence.
Okay, I can see that.
As soon as your confidence wavers a little bit, you know, Brandon Powell just shot 199 at that shooters championship. Okay. And he shot, you know, 51 on the first day of the US Open, 83 in some of the side events, you know, because he's missing, you know. So once you're missing, it's easier to miss. Okay. Once you're hitting them, it's easier to hit them. Right. You know, so it's related to the visual part of the game is directly correlated to your mental game, for sure. Uh, and it's hard to kind of put all that together, right? You know, it's
You know, speaking of that, you're obviously a champion, multiple time champion, world, national. I mean, the accolades are immense with you guys, and you're just breaking 40, which kills me too because I'm much older than you. But I obviously started much later than you. But what do you think separates champions from people that are great shooters who never quite make it to the top level that you guys are at?
you know, there's a lot of things. I mean, I don't think it's you know, do I think certain people have uh, are more inclined to be successful just based upon being born that way? Yeah, maybe. But you know, I don't. You know, I wasn't the most. My brother's a better shot than I am naturally, right? You know,
You
he
said
doesn't.
that before. Is that really
He doesn't.
true though?
Yeah, just natural shot. Yeah, for sure. You know,
Okay.
so but that's not the end of it, right? That's
Right,
only a
right, right.
part of it, right? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
so you know, I think that look. the sport requires a massive commitment, to like anything at the highest level, right? So I think sometimes it's not just opportunity, right? Some people have more opportunity than other people. Some people are more determined to get there than other people. Some people are willing to sacrifice more to get there. Look, if someone is, you know, um, dealing with some type of significant cross dominance and they're saying, that they want to be the world champion and, the next guy sitting next to him doesn't have to deal with that and he's practicing just as much, that guy's got a massive advantage, right?
Right, right.
But that's the same in every sport, right? If you're 5'7" and you want to be a champion long distance track runner, you're probably not going to beat the guy who's 6'4". So there is some of that, right? But outside of, in general, our sport is not a sport that I feel like you need a lot of just born attributes. It doesn't hurt though, outside of something that's significantly holding the person back. I think it's just the unwillingness to fail, is probably the one that's rooted in there throughout. Once we take out the opportunity and the dedication and the
Mm-hmm.
sacrifices, and
Do you mean when you say the unwillingness to fail, do you mean the willingness to recover after failure?
yeah, to figure out what's required to get to the next point,
Gotcha,
right?
gotcha. Okay.
The willingness to figure out what's required to get to the next point.
Hmm. Do
And
you feel like a lot of other disciplined shooters, let's say trap or skeet, because it's such a perfection game, have a challenge going into sporting because of that reason? They're not willing
um,
to fail or miss targets and I don't mean to, trash talk anyone other discipline, but I find that a lot of folks that are in the perfect game sports tend to shy away from sporting clays and FITASC because you can miss in that, and you tend to miss in that because it's more difficult presentations. Or am I just thinking of that wrong?
no, I mean, it's like that could be very well be true. I mean, I feel like the problem with skeet and trap is you can be really good not understanding all the fundamentals of shotgun shooting, and if the
Right.
person has gotten to that level, doing it a different way, then their subconscious is, has to unlearn,
Right.
I think it's more physical than just mental. I think it's more mechanics. You can be a really good trap shooter, freaking aiming at all of them, but you can't be that good of a sporting clay shooter aiming at all of them, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
I think that there's some just physical mechanics of the game that actually uh, don't translate over well.
Yeah. No, yeah, I've always said trap and skeet in certain disciplines are a target sport, and sporting clays, FITASC, maybe even ZZ Birds is a sport that teaches you how to shoot a shotgun and use a
Yeah.
shotgun.
Yep.
But
Absolutely.
going back to the eyes, because I know you've done a lot around the eye stuff and you work with a lot of students regarding this. And frankly, you're the reason why I'm wearing these glasses right now, just so you know. We were at a dinner and you were talking to Zach and you mentioned that you were getting your eyes checked. And I asked you, oh, do you get your eyes checked? Do you wear glasses? And you said, no. And I'm like, so why are you getting your eyes checked then? He goes, and you said, you don't get your eyes checked? And I'm like, no, I've never gotten my eyes checked. He goes, you should probably get your eyes checked because you don't know as you're getting older. I'm like, well, I can see fine and I'm good. Well, I go to the doctor. Long story short, I'm wearing glasses now because I had astigmatism and I didn't even know about it.
Gotcha.
And I didn't realize how much I was missing at 40 yards plus. And
Yep.
so now, as my eyes every year have actually been deteriorating, I've been getting updates and corrections. But because of that correction, I went from A class to master class relatively quick because I was able to see the target a lot better.
Hmm.
So when you're progressing, so you're regular getting eyes checked still?
I haven't really that much. I mean, I basically do like a basic eye exam. I need to though. I need to actually this winter go get a real full eye exam.
Okay.
But no, I haven't really actually done that much of it. But I mean, I was thinking about it this winter. I was at Disney World with my kids and my wife, and I was like, let's go over there. It's only a 30-minute wait, and I have four kids with me and my wife, and I'm the only one that can see the sign. So I'm like, uh, I guess my eyes are pretty good. Uh,
Yeah. No, I mean, that's huge. I mean, that's an absolute advantage. I mean, I didn't realize that how well some people can see. until
Right.
you get
Yeah, and
correction.
you don't know, right? So how do you know if you hadn't checked it, right? You
I
know.
figured everyone was blurry past 50 yards, and that is
Right.
absolutely not the case. So
Right.
your eyes are still pretty good. It sounds like it. Do you do anything to for with your eyes, or are you just
Not really. I
naturally?
mean, I generally eat pretty healthy, but
Okay.
I guess that can't hurt, but I don't
Yeah.
do anything particularly. Eat a lot of vegetables.
Okay.
Um,
So
try to
are you a pretty like a would you say like a obviously you're fit and everything. Do you work out? Do you eat
I work
healthy? It
out
sounds like it.
I work out enough to, I have a little bit of a bad back, so I work out in my core and work out my legs, and that helps my back for sure.
Hmm.
Um, I don't, I'm not a diehard, go to the gym every day type of deal, but I'll go anywhere from 1 to 3 to 4 days a week, at the most, and not long, 30 minutes, get my heart rate up a little bit, no like real heavy weights, a lot of resistance stuff, back, stretch. Half the reason I go is so I stretch for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Stretch for 10 minutes, do some core stuff, some light weights, some resistance stuff.
But no
Just
eye
this,
training. Nothing related to the eyes. Okay.
no,
Well, you're
no.
looking at targets all day long. I guess that could be
Yeah,
eye
I
training,
see a
right?
lot of targets.
Yeah, yeah. And that helps, right? And your coaching, would you say that helps you
Yeah, I mean,
watching targets?
the thing that I think it the thing that I think it helps with is just paying attention and looking at the clay and seeing a part of the bird and reading the bird and understanding what the bird's doing. Um, you know, People ask me sometimes, I coach a lot. Sometimes I'll go like 20 days in a row. Um, the only thing you have to balance is just staying motivated. You know, spend a large part of my life on a sporting clay range, right? And then I got to get done and go practice, and then I got to, go to the tournament, right? So you have to, so in one regard, it makes it, less sensitive, I would say, right? Like, I'm not, I'm not, you know, I'm comfortable in my environment, so to speak.
Right, right.
Um, but you got to stay hungry, right? You gotta,
Hmm.
you gotta want to be out there. So I got to balance that a little bit. But I take some time off, and I don't shoot much actual shoot in the wintertime, and then I'll take the month of August off from coaching and fish a bunch of big fishing tournaments. So I get some breaks. That's also the reason I've been doing this a long time, and I plan to do it for a long time. So sometimes it's like I'm not going to go like this summer. I'm not going to many of the regionals, if any of them. Um, just you know,
Just to balance out the time and
yeah, it's
finding
just to balance out the
things
time.
to do.
I
Yeah,
got other things I want to do, and I'm not going.
sure,
Right,
sure.
so
How
maybe
did you get into fishing out of curiosity? Has this been a thing that you've always done? Or I mean, because you guys do some pretty big.
So I grew up fishing. We had a little boat when I was a kid and grew up near the water here, fishing in the creeks and crabbing and stuff like that. And we used to fish on the Delaware Bay. My dad had a 20-foot boat. We would go out, once a week or something and fish for, whatever's in the bay, flounder and bluefish or whatever. And then actually, that gentleman that I was telling you I traveled with as a kid, he had a boat in the Florida Keys. That gentleman named Tom Spurl, and he would invite me to go with him. And then at the same time, my uncle, my aunt and uncle, my dad's sister, they had got a boat and started to go offshore occasionally, and they invited me. So they invited me, and then that guy that I shot with had a boat, and I went with him down in the Florida Keys and the Bahamas. Just kind of, really lot into it and liked it. And then my dad kind of always wanted to do it. And he fished a little bit offshore, like as a teenager. One of his uncles had a boat, so he had done it a little bit. And we just kind of all got into it and started doing it together when I was maybe 15 years old. And we just kind of progressed from there and got more serious into it and got a bigger boat and then another boat. And here we are. This is like our 26th season
Wow.
of doing it. So, and we take
I think
it.
it's awesome that you and your family are so close and doing things together. I work with a lot of, private companies, large private companies where it's multi-generational families. And it's not always the case that everyone gets along, wants to work together, sees each other almost 24/7 working together and doing this, but then also want to play together. What do you think is your family's like secret to keep everything kind of, fun, cordial, and that you guys still want to hang out with each other?
I mean, kind of share a common goal type of thing would be the best answer I could give you.
Yeah.
Share a common goal that you're working towards. Even like when we fish and we enjoy it, but we take it super serious. It's for fun, but it's also not for fun. It's to be good at it. So, um,
What do you mean when you're doing it even for fun? You guys are competing
oh yeah,
against each other, or what are you
yeah. I mean,
doing?
we fish tournaments and everything else. So it's like a team basically,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I mean, it doesn't always, back to your point, it's not always perfect, and you have disagreements, et cetera. But uh, you know, move on and work it out.
Yeah.
That's about it,
Yeah.
right?
Would you say so? You got one brother,
I have one brother and one sister.
one brother and one. So your sister's younger, older,
She's younger. She's 6 years younger than me.
and with your family, how you guys all interact. Does it feel like everybody's equal, and everyone, or is there like a hierarchy within your family? Everyone kind of follows one person.
No, I mean, I would say we complement each other well, So
Mhm.
like my brother, my brother at M&M, my brother kind of runs the outside operations, with the guys.
Okay.
I kind of run more of like the business side and the marketing side and the, finance side, so to speak, of, what we're doing and decisions we're making and, coming up with the kind of more of the business plan side. And he's more of a in the field execution, So I wouldn't say it's, there's things that he does that, he's a lot better at than I am. And there's things that I do that I'm a lot better at than he is, So,
And
um,
he doesn't shoot at all, huh?
not really. He still hunts, goes
Gotcha.
hunting and stuff a little bit, but doesn't shoot at all seriously.
Interesting. Okay. And your sister, is she involved in the shooting
She
too, or
hunts occasionally. She did as a kid growing up. She hunted a little bit and she shot clays a little bit, but she never took it like seriously. She shoots well enough to go out there and probably could go to a tournament and shoot a 65 or a 70 on a tournament with not having shot in a while, but that's about the extent of it.
and mom and dad don't participate in any tournaments, or
Nah, my mom never did. My dad did a little bit when my brother and I were shooting. To be honest with you, he never, he always did it because he was taking us. So he just
right?
shot to keep himself busy. He never really took it seriously,
Mhm.
and he would just be more aggravated than enjoying himself because he thought he could hit more than he thought he could hit more than he was, but he was probably hitting exactly the amount he should have been hitting.
Has he
It
never
wasn't.
taken a lesson with you or a shot with you? Like he doesn't want to?
No,
No.
so you know, he never really took it serious enough to uh he never took it serious enough to care that much about it.
Yeah.
And probably just because, it's around his work every day of what he was doing. It's like when he wasn't working, he'd rather be doing something different,
Right,
right?
right, right, right. I was going to ask you about that too. I mean, like, how do you stay in it after you? I mean, you're in the industry like in so many different ways, right? You help man run the gun club. You're a shooter. You've been part of the NSCA's council. You are an ambassador for Beretta and a sponsor shooter by Beretta. I mean, you're immersed in always. You're a target setter. You coach, people. I mean, there's so many ways that you come about this. Is there any a time where you're just like, I'm so tired of all this stuff, or do you just love it so much that it just keeps you motivated until you start finding other angles to get involved in?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's what I do, right? So I think that's the answer, right? Um, I, it probably started, when I graduated college. I could have done pretty much whatever I wanted. I had good grades in college. I had plenty of contacts. I had some uh, job offers and different opportunities. And I had already been teaching shooting all through high school, and I taught shooting every weekend in college. I went to school an hour and a half from home, and I'd come home every Friday, Saturday, Sunday if I didn't have classes on Friday. And so I already had a good business. And when I graduated from college, I basically said, man, if I want to shoot and go to 6 tournaments next year, there's no way I'm going to get a job that my first, year working there, they're going to say, yeah, you can go away for 6 weeks.
Right,
Your first,
right.
your first, So I was like, I got to figure out how to make this work. So I had already been making good money teaching shooting, and so I'm just going to do that and then work with my family, hosting the tournaments, etc. And mostly just teach shooting as my main source of income because our business didn't necessarily have a job position for me that was going to pay that well
Hmm.
at the time. It's our business is bigger now, we've expanded, et cetera, but there wasn't enough to go around there for everybody.
Right,
Um,
right.
so
And you've
probably
been coaching since you were 14?
I started teaching when I was 14.
So, I mean,
Just
that's amazing to me. So these were adults, not just juniors and kids
Yeah, it
and
was pretty much all adults. I mean, some
yeah.
kids, but I just put a sign up at the gun club, $25 an hour, shooting
Hmm.
instruction. And
And that's how it
I
started.
gained I gained experience just by having the opportunity to teach people, and then I was learning and getting good instruction. Um, so I was taking what I was learning and teaching people that.
And
And
you were winning events too at 15 and
yeah, so I had
onward. So
enough of a
yeah.
resume to substantiate if I went to the local tournament and there was 100 people there and I won the tournament and I was offering shooting instruction. You didn't have to be that crazy to take a lesson from a 15 or 16-year old because he just beat you in the last tournament and
Right.
he was doing that
Yeah, age has
consistently.
nothing to do with it. Age has
I
nothing to do
mean,
with it, is what I
a
know. Or,
little bit
honestly,
maybe,
even
but
sometimes even class.
I
I've
mean,
learned some things from lower class shooters that look at it
yeah, I mean,
differently than I do.
I was, you know, going out there and giving 100% effort to teach the people whatever it was that I knew. I mean,
Right.
thinking back on it, I didn't really know that much back then, but I taught them whatever I knew, right? I
Yeah,
taught them
yeah, yeah,
twenty
yeah.
five
Well, you
dollars
knew
and
enough
right,
that you could more than they did at least.
right,
So.
right.
So with that, like I mean, you're known as like the coach's coach, meaning you coach coaches, you coach champions, you've coached so many people and have a steady, calendar of booked appointments. When you're working with, let's say, like a champion versus like the beginner shooter, and it sounds like I don't. Do you work with beginner shooters at all, or is that
No, I still do.
off?
I mean, I
Okay,
actually enjoy it. I just don't get that many of them because my calendar is so busy that most of your beginning shooters, most of the novice shooters, they think about, oh, I should get a lesson. They want to come out next month. I
right.
don't have anything available for you next month. So, and they're in the beginning stages. They want to get started and they want to learn correctly right away. So I've lost a lot of that business. I enjoy doing it. I do specifically put in my calendar some half day shooting schools, which I save spots for less experienced groups. I'll have a whole group that'll be pretty novice, and I'll do probably 20 half days a year, of different group schools, and I get in some novices or lower level shooters with that. I enjoyed teaching. I started off teaching a lot of novices, right? And I still, my favorite student is still a guy that's got 5,000 shots under his belt, comfortable with his gun, shot his first tournament, has some abilities, and just doesn't know what he's doing yet.
Yeah,
That guy can, you can take that guy from shooting 40 in his first tournament to shooting 80 at the end of the year, if
right.
because you
Well,
can
the
read.
excitement, it gets a little contagious with them, right? Because you forgot about, at least I have. I'm shooting with a squad now where they're just hooked and they're addicted and they love it and they're having fun. It's just something about that energizes me when
Yeah.
I shoot with them. So I
Yeah.
get
That's my favorite student, so I mean, I love teaching, guys that are, really good as well, but, um, I don't, that's probably one thing as a coach that as part of the reason of my success is, I'm give I give the student 110%, whether their, potential is to go out there and their long-term potential is, to shoot a 75 or to shoot a 95, right?
right.
So, um,
And I don't mean this question like I'm questioning why. It's more of like, but from your perspective, why do you think pros want to come to you? Like, what do they think that they're getting from you that they can't get from themselves, from other pros? What do you think is like the
I think that a couple of things. I think that number one, uh, I can teach them, you know. I can teach them some things of how to be a better competitor.
Hmm.
I think I can teach them a better understanding of the visual part of the game, and all the nuances to it, and there's, just as much as we're talking about looking at the bird, well, there's some birds that, you know, I don't see the bird as, I intentionally don't look at the bird as clear, and there's other birds that I see the gun more, and there's birds I see the gun less, so all those nuances.
Hmm.
I also feel like there's a lot of people that have a really good basis in their game and do really well, and they're afraid that other coaches are going to change them too much. Okay, meaning they're going to be you know, too drastic in their, what they tell them is they need to do differently.
Right, right,
And whether it's from people telling them or my dialogue, they feel comfortable with, that I'm going to not turn the card upside down,
hmm
if something is too far away from, you know, maybe what somebody else might tell them being more drastic, So I think there's a little bit of that, meaning that I can kind of you know, work within what you're doing, I mean, there's certain things I'll tell people, I say, look, I want to change as little as possible, but if it's not going to work, then we got to change. If I don't think it's going to work, then, I'm going to tell you, right.
right,
But
right.
I'm not going to tell you to change something because it's different than the way that I'm doing it. I'll tell you to change something if I think it's actually, if I watch you shoot and feel like it's actually costing you the shot,
Mhm.
or holding you back, So
I
I
think
think maybe
it
that,
sounds like to me you're selfless about it, you're objective about it to them, to where they're truly getting an honest opinion from
yeah,
you.
I'm not,
You don't have an
there to,
ego in it.
yeah, I'm not there to tell you that my way is the best way,
Right,
anybody's way is the best way if it breaks the most amount of birds,
right.
so, right. That's so maybe that,
Do
maybe
you see
being
a
a
common
competitor.
theme amongst the pros though, where when they come to you, where there's like a common thing that they end up, a lot of people end up at when they reach a certain stage, whether it's confidence boost, whether it's looking at it a little bit differently or having a perspective shift. Is that like what
There's
do
a
you see?
lot, so I had somebody
Mhm.
here last week, I'll refrain from saying their name,
Sure, sure.
not for, not that I think they would care, but, just, I didn't necessarily, talk about it with them that I would be telling people on a podcast. Um, Somebody else, Zach knew that he was here, and Zach said, how did he do? I was like, freaking really good, he was like, what were you working on with him? I said, there's, a couple little, couple form things, but I said, I mostly just taught him every trick that I know in every situation, right? You got at this station, you got to have a better hold point than you do, right? This station, you got to mount a bigger lead. You're starting too close to the bird. This station, every nuance of the game that I feel like can, you know, get him a bird here and a bird there and a bird here and a bird there. And it might not be on a given day on a given course. This guy can easily beat me when he's on his game. So it might not give him any birds, right? But on another course, it could give him a handful. But
Right.
we also spent probably what I would make up as 30 to 40% of what was important was just understanding how to be a little bit better competitor, right? Like this is this is what I think you need to, use this as a template of what I think you need to do. Um, so it's a variety of things. It's not one thing. It's a little bit of everything. There's definitely always something I can teach someone about being a better competitor. There's always nuances of the game,
Mhm.
that I'm looking at something and I understand more about what's going on when I look at that target than they did, and then what
Do
that
you feel
means.
like it gives you a competitive advantage knowing where your competitor's head's at, and maybe not necessarily their weaknesses, but like, that they're going through the same things that you've either gone through or that you're going through?
Um, you know, if there was anything, like, I looked at this guy that was here last week and I said, uh, this guy is actually way more talented than me, way more. Okay. Um, because
I feel like when I mean, I believe you, but I feel like you are overly humble about your ability, though.
no, what I mean by that is, if he knew everything that I knew and was
Yeah.
making all the decisions that I did,
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
I would never beat him. Okay. Right. you
Okay.
Now on the flip side, his mental game is probably a little bit easier because he doesn't know as much.
Mhm.
But what he doesn't know is costing him. Right. I can see what he doesn't know costing him shots. Right. So, but that's also part of the learning curve. I specifically told him, I said, look, I'm going to tell you something that I think you need to do. You go and try it, and work on it. I think you need to do it, but if you think that's overcomplicating the game, then don't worry about it,
Mhm.
right? But I feel like if he could do it without overcomplicating the game, he's going to be technically better,
Mhm.
on it from a technique standpoint and approach standpoint. So, I teach people that way too. Like, try this. You know, if you don't feel like you can do it without thinking too much about it, then don't worry about it till November. You know.
I feel like you obviously a student of the game, 100%, but where does Anthony go to get coached? I feel like, bear with me when I say this, but I feel like that experience that you had with George Digweed, where you both were talking to each other, was that like a coaching experience for you, in some form?
It definitely helped me. It helped me more, definitely more from a mental standpoint than a couple things that helped me mentally more than it did technically. We really didn't, he really didn't look at many things that I did technically, or
Right, right.
I didn't really make much changes. It,
But I don't
uh,
feel like at your level you're making changes that way, right? It's more like understanding your competitor's mindset more that I think is
yeah,
helpful
yeah,
at
yeah. So
your
that
level of
that
training.
that helped me for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, that helped me for sure a little bit. And then, look, I used to, Corey Cruz and I used to, you know, shoot a lot together, and get together and practice, when we were probably between 18 years old and 25, 28, somewhere in that 10-year time frame between 17 and, 30. Um,
He would come
we
to M&M, or
Yeah,
you
most of the
meet up
time
at
he would
different
come
places.
here before we would go to Europe or something like that, or come
Mhm.
here before a big tournament in the summertime, and we'd spend 3, 4 days just shooting and practicing, and maybe doing some lessons, and then shoot after that. And so we talked about the game a lot and learned a lot, different things together. Dan also taught him, but our approach now is pretty, I wouldn't say fundamentally it's the same as from what Dan taught us, but it's much more sophisticated, than it was then, right? But the game's more sophisticated than it was when we were learning from him at 15 years old.
And are you
So,
referring to the pull away method primarily, or are you referring to a whole
yeah, I
basket
mean,
of?
just in general, right?
Okay.
Basically, we learned basic fundamentals, connect with the bird. Most of the time, it was a pull away. Dan taught you to shoot, maintain lead when you didn't have enough time.
Okay.
Um, Quartering and trap stuff that was fast, stay ahead of it. But it was just pretty, pretty elementary in terms of sticking to fundamentals. So like Corey helped me a lot then. Just I wouldn't say necessarily specifically coaching me, but because we shot together.
Yeah.
Somebody
He was your
watching over
training
your
partner.
Yeah, somebody watching over your shoulder that could tell you what happened. Right now, I don't ever have anyone. Um,
Yeah.
Zach was just up he stayed at my house for 2 weeks when he shot that North American shoot, and then he did some lessons, and I was out shooting, and he came out there one day. I was actually helping Desi with some couple things, and I was like, Zach, watch me shoot this low incomer, and I've missed those things my whole life. Okay, and I've gotten better with them, for sure. But I missed a couple, and I was like, "Am I over that?" Because I can never tell, right? Like, and I
Interesting.
could get
Okay.
further under it or closer to it, and I get better, but marginally, right? I
Mhm.
just practice them enough to believe I'm going to hit them. I never really
Is this
actually
like a close incomer or like a far incomer?
like a low incomer, anywhere from 20 yards to 35.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
Like head high off the ground,
Mhm.
straight at you. If it's got angle in it, I always have less trouble. And I just practiced them enough to believe I'm going to hit them. I never actually figured them out. Okay, so I just practiced them enough to be able to hit it, and never could understand sometimes what the hell is going wrong. But I couldn't, I can't see myself shoot it. I tried everything. I've tried it, shooting it every possible way you could shoot it, and luckily they're not common enough that it, you know,
Comes up a lot.
right, exactly. Sometimes you shoot a whole big tournament, don't even see one. But anyway,
What did Zach have to say?
well, I missed the first time one I missed. He's like, "You shot under it." I'm like, really? I'm like, I feel like I've always shot over them. So I shot another one. He's like, "You're under that one too." So I've definitely been shooting under them, but then must be letting the bird just fall into me at the last second. So, that makes sense because then I'm not matching the bird's speed. I'm under it and it's collapsing into me too much, and the gun speed and the bird speed aren't the same,
Mhm.
but I've often felt like sometimes I hit them better when I started further under it. So, and then I've shot some since then. I just shot some the other day when I was teaching at a place, and I had brought my gun afterwards and shot, and they had a couple tricky ones, and I shot them real well.
Mhm.
And I was like, huh,
So when you're training yourself, it sounds like a lot of pros, when again getting at your level and stage, it's a lot of experimentation to what works for you. It sounds like it, and then you're just working on it and thinking about what you need to do for you. Is that
yeah, you do what you believe is correct, right?
right?
And then you deduce from there, right? So it's like I might not know what was wrong, but I know that I did these things correctly, so it's got to be something else, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have someone to tell you, and what you're looking for, if someone was there, is such a fine level that not that many people can tell you.
Mhm.
Uh, there's a handful of people that I would trust to stand over my shoulder.
Right. Sure. Sure. On a separate note, do you think of yourself more as a shooter, a coach, or something totally different, like a gun club owner? Like what do you, if you were to define yourself of those categories first, priority, what would it be
I mean, all of the above. I mean, I try to do
for all
all
the
of them
hats?
well, right?
Yeah,
Try
yeah,
to do all of them well, right? I really, I can't really give you one answer, right? I guess if I was going to say or something else, I would say a brand, right?
yeah.
That's how I make every decision that I make based upon, you know, uh,
The
my
brand of
brand,
Anthony Matarese and who you
So
are.
yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense.
myself, AM shooting, Eminem, so if that's how I make my decisions of, what I think is a valid option, right?
Yeah,
So
no, it's fair, and you've created an amazing brand. I mean, everyone in the sport knows who you are. You have won numerous accolades. You throw the best tournaments. So no, that makes a lot of sense. So it's all encompassing then. You just
yep.
consider yourself. I don't want to. There's not even a category for you because you do it all, right? So an all arounder, I guess, is the word. But how's your relationship, by the way, with that change with the sports as you've grown older?
In what regard? Just like
Like, I mean, you started off, shooter, coach, but your relationship with it, are you finding yourself with the brand that you've created more investing into it, or do you feel like it's now running it on its own and you're just kind of, I don't want to say coasting, but I guess it's doing its own thing.
yeah. I mean, I'm always trying to do better than I'm doing at anything that I'm doing, which is I guess good.
Yeah.
Comes with a lot of work, but I could probably just coast, right? But no, I'm always still working at it, trying to figure out what we're going to do a little bit better in every one of those in every one of those segments, right? How am I
Yeah.
going to be a better shooter? How are we going to throw better tournaments? How are we going to have a better shooting school? How are we going to teach people more? So, uh, you know, I don't think I'll ever be just coasting.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you ever
you know,
take like when I say you take a break, I'm sure you do. You take breaks to go do other things. But do you literally just take a break from family, from shooting, from fishing, from the business, just to be by yourself and doing something?
Not really. No.
No? Okay.
I mean, I enjoy cooking. I enjoy spending time
Okay.
with my family. Um,
What do you cook? What's your favorite dish to cook?
uh, anything,
Yeah?
you
Nothing
know,
specific?
yeah, nothing
You're not a
specific.
steak guy or a
I
pasta
like a
guy
good
or
steak, I like a
okay.
good steak, but pasta, steak, whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, I actually cook in our, some of the lunches in our, we do some formal lunches at our lodge. I'll cook some of those on a weekend. I'll take a half a day off from lessons and cook when we have a big group. Um, and my girls will come over, my younger girls will work with us. We actually have my aunt's a chef, and we have another part-time chef that works with us. But I'll cook lunch on half a dozen or 10 days a year for some big groups, and
Right on.
to me, it's like that's like a day off.
Is it? Okay, it's like a relaxing
Yeah,
endeavor
the
for
kids
you.
can come to work with me, and they're learning what's going on here, and
Yeah.
uh,
Do you
so
do you do you have any other guilty pleasures? Like do you Netflix or do you binge shows? Do I don't know.
going out to dinner and eating good food, that's probably my biggest extravagance.
Okay.
Going to a good restaurant and not really giving a shit what the bill is.
Yeah.
That's that's probably my biggest extravagance. My wife and I try to go out on Friday nights. Pretty much not every Friday night, assuming we don't have something going on, but probably we make it out. You know, half the Friday nights, just her and I go to dinner and get a babysitter. So go to a good restaurant.
You're known for being incredibly focused, but is there something that throws off your focus or easily distracts you?
Um, I don't know, not really.
No? Okay. So I'll
Yeah,
I'll focus for Anthony then.
yeah, I'm pretty
No
pretty ready.
ADHD over on that end, or
Nah, I mean, I don't know, not really. I'll go bass fishing or something with the kids at the lake, and
yeah.
just relax and enjoy myself. But that's about it. Um,
What's on Anthony's YouTube search history?
yeah, I don't watch YouTube that much.
Really? Okay.
My kids have every possible thing you can search on there. Kid stuff. To be honest with you, I get done work, check my emails, look at some fishing reports on Instagram on different pages that I follow from different places in the world, and
No comedy, no like other
I
fun
do
stuff.
like comedy a little bit. I like I'll if I'm gonna watch TV, it's either the news or like some type of murder mystery or something. If not, I
Okay.
fall
So you
asleep.
keep it
If
serious. You keep it
if I'm
serious.
not engaged with it, I'm falling
Cerebral and
asleep.
serious.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. All right. All right. Did you ever name any of your guns?
No, I'm
Never?
kind of definitely like it's a tool. That's all it
Okay.
is. Wipe it off. You
Don't
know,
talk to your gun or anything?
that's it.
That's it.
Just
It's a
like
tool.
just like a hammer.
Right. I guess I don't talk to my hammer, so.
Right. It's just like a hammer.
Just last couple questions, and I'll let you go because I know it's late over there. But what's one myth about you that you wish people would stop thinking or repeating about you?
I don't really know to be honest with you. I don't know if there are any. What you got? You got one that you've heard?
No, I mean you pretty much live what you are, so you are what you
Yeah,
like. I don't see any myths out there,
I'm
but
pretty black and white. I
yeah,
don't. You know, I don't. Whatever I tell you is that's what I think, and as long as you don't mind,
the
you know,
honesty.
honesty, then we're gonna be fine, right?
Yeah, yeah. Here's the last question. If you had to coach a celebrity, a non-shooter celebrity, to shoot in a big event, who would you choose for the challenge or the fun of it?
um,
Think about this for a second. Just to give it, I know it's late. I know it's late, but think about it for a second. Who's the guy or gal or, you know, that you would want to take out and coach and shoot at a big event with?
uh,
I know you're
maybe Michael Jordan.
okay.
He
All right, fair.
actually he actually fishes. He ties his boat up in the same marina as us in the summertime.
Does he?
some of my friends actually know, actually my mate fishes with him because my mate's pretty damn good, and he gets hired on for some of the tournaments to fish on Michael Jordan's boat because he's basically picking all stars, and so he fishes with him a little bit. So just for the opportunity to pick his brain and talk to him, that would be why,
I'd be
you know.
surprised if he said no to you if you guys decided to do that. Invite him over to M&M and get him out there, you know?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I could see that though. Anthony and Michael Jordan.
Yeah,
Oh
he
man,
fishes a bunch
that'd
of
be a combo right there.
fishes a bunch of the tournaments that we fish.
Well, we got to get Michael Jordan into shooting then.
There you go.
Well, Anthony, man, I really appreciate your time. This is I know you're super busy. You're doing this super late over there in New Jersey. So again, appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Glad to be on, and we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Would love that. Thanks,
Good
man.
deal. Take care.